And today, Professor Carsten will be discussing her research on followers' roles in the leadership process and the pioneering work she and her colleagues have done to develop followership theory and research. And that data will be presented today has been collected in a variety of organizations, including hospitals in both the US and Denmark. And Professor Carsten is especially interested in healthcare leadership as the challenges and opportunities facing health organizations emphasize the increasing need for inclusive and supportive leadership at every level of the organization. So before handing over to Melissa, I just want to very quickly introduce myself and my colleague. So I'm Noel Postis, and I'm from the People and Culture team within Learning and Development, Manager of Workforce Development Programs.
And I'm Ruth Ward, I'm the Workforce Leadership and Talent Manager for the Kids Hospital, the Kids Network at Rhinebeck and Westmead.
So the presentation will go about 35 minutes or so, and then we'll have about 15 minutes of Q&A. Just to let you know that we are connected on video conference as well to some people who have dialed in, and we are also filming this presentation as well. So without any further ado, thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Noel and Ruth, for the marvelous introduction. Thank you. Thank you all for coming today. I really appreciate the invitation to come speak with you all. One thing that Noel didn't mention, because I forgot to tell him to mention it, was that I'm currently serving as a visiting scholar in the Department of Work and Organization Studies at the University of Sydney. I've been here since the middle of July and actually rounding out my position. We leave in a week and a half. So this is a nice way to kind of end my work with the University of Sydney, and I'm very happy to be here at Westmead. So I'm going to talk with you today a little bit about the research and theory development that we've been doing around followership. And it's funny, in a conversation with Noel prior to the session, he said, I've been having to practice that word, followership. And I said, that is telling in and of itself that we don't really talk about this topic. And so today what I'm going to do is I'm going to hopefully dispel a couple of myths, challenge you to think a little bit differently about leadership and followership, and then also ask you to think about your own styles working with people in your divisions and in your departments. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'll start off by just laying a foundation for what leadership and followership is, right? So one of the famous quotes about leadership says there are almost as many definitions of leadership as people who have attempted to define it. So leadership is a vast, very complex subject and topic, and so we're going to start just kind of by laying those foundations. I'll talk to you a little bit about how followers have been treated in leadership research over the last 150 years. And spoiler alert, they haven't really been talked about in leadership research for the last 150 years. I'll talk about the research that we're currently doing. And then most importantly to all of you is I will talk about some of the implications for managers specifically in health organizations. So let's start with what we know, okay? We know about leadership. We've been studying leadership since just before the turn of the century in the Industrial Revolution. There's over 20 years of research on who leaders are, how they engage with constituents in the organizations. And these are just a couple of things that we know leaders need to do well in order to be successful. I say the word leadership, and you all have a good working definition of what that term is. You hear the word leader, and it calls to mind examples of people that you know directly or perhaps from a distance that have had a positive influence on you. We know that leaders engage in providing a compelling vision for the future, a direction that we're all going to unite behind and go together. They do a lot of work around planning, around setting objectives and helping people to get there. Leaders engage in a lot of decision making, a lot of problem solving. They have to work with their employees and build teams and make sure those teams are effective and successful. They engage in shared governance, and probably most importantly, they have a very high accountability for outcomes. In the healthcare sector, and I don't need to tell you this, right? I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but there's a lot of challenges surrounding leaders and leadership today in these organizations. You're working with increased calls for better care, increased costs associated with healthcare delivery. You're challenged by things like shrinking workforces and challenges with employees that you work with on a day-to-day basis, multidisciplinary functions and people that have wide varieties of skill levels and education. And so these kinds of challenges are enhanced for leaders in a healthcare setting. And one of the ways that I think that we can adapt to some of these challenges is by thinking more about leadership as a more inclusive process and not necessarily just coming from the leader. So traditionally, when we talk about leadership, the one thing that comes to mind is the leader, right? We hold leaders as sole proprietors for the success of leadership. When we think about successful leadership, we think about a successful leader. We look to leaders as the ones who are solely responsible for positive and or negative outcomes, right? We look to leaders to give us direction, as if we don't have our own ideas about where we should go, right? So we kind of put leaders on a pedestal. If you Google leadership, you will get about 13 million hits. If you Google followership, you'll not even get 100,000. So what is the follower's role in leadership, right? One of my favorite quotes says, in highly complex, differentiated, and constantly changing environments, can leaders really ever act alone? They require the insight, advice, and critical thinking of those around them. They require the assistance of followers. Another quote that comes directly from the Australian Institute of Management says, while the health sector faces significant challenges in the future to provide the level of services that all Australians expect, it's essential that health sector leaders continue to develop the capabilities of their workforce, regardless of their position, location, or age. So to this, what I would say is, if we really want to develop successful leaders, we need to expand our definition of leadership, and that expansion needs to include the role of followers. In order to do this, we have to dispel a couple of myths about followers and followership. So, how many of you are currently managers? You manage other staff. Okay, let me ask you this. How many of you are followers? Not very many people want to raise their hand to that. Did you get kind of a sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach when you had, no, good. All right, so you're already there, right? I think that there's sometimes a negative connotation associated with this word follower, right? That throughout history, we've seen examples of followers kind of just going along mindlessly with the direction and wishes of their leaders, not thinking independently or critically about what they're being asked to do. But this is not really what followership is. Followership has a range of styles and is just as dynamic as leadership is. And for those of you who are currently in managerial positions, you know that you work with followers, or we can call them something else, subordinates, associates, partners. We can call them a lot of other things. But you currently work with people that are highly engaged, right? They want to engage with you as a leader. They want to get involved in the process. Sometimes more than you would want them to, right? But they want to involve themselves. So we have to kind of think about followership differently. So let's provide some definitions for these terms. Okay. Gerlowski says followers are those who work with leaders to advance the mission and vision of the organization. Does this have a negative connotation? No, it's kind of neutral, right? So according to this definition, followers are not good or bad. They are neutral. And I would offer beyond that, that the way followership is practiced can be positive or negative, right? But followers themselves are neutral. The definition, very long definition in academia, we like really long definitions, right? So the definition that we've offered for followership is that it is a process of individuals working with leaders to accomplish some goal or objective by bringing in their unique characteristics, skills, and behaviors, and systematically applying them in a relational context. So that followers are simply individuals working with leaders. They have different styles of working with leaders. They bring different personal characteristics, different skills, different abilities into their work with leaders. And I think one of the things that we're missing currently in the leadership research and a lot of developmental work that's done around leadership development, is the idea of how do you capitalize on the assistance of the people that you're working with, right? And not try to, as a leader, do everything, be everything all by yourself, right? So I'll talk a little bit more about research and the way that research has treated followers. One of my favorite quotes says, although there are leadership studies that incorporate data about followers, none of them explicitly deals with followership, meaning that we have very little research that looks at how followers engage with leaders, what types of styles they adopt in their interactions, how they decide what the right timing is or the right way to bring up challenges, opportunities, new information to assist with problem solving, right? With leadership, there's this power dynamic. Most managers have greater levels of power and authority. And there are many people that sit below that level of power and authority that are simply afraid to speak up. They're afraid to get involved. They're afraid to step on the toes or cross over a boundary that is implicitly there from that power dynamic and that authority difference. So that's what we're studying. So another quote from Shamir says, followers have been viewed as recipients or moderators of leaders' influence and as vehicles for the actualization of a leader's vision, mission, or goals. So basically what this is saying is that for over 100 years, we've been looking at followers as recipients of a leader's influence, right? That the influence comes from the top down, that leaders have all of the answers, they have all of the better problem-solving ability, they are the critical thinkers, they are the ones that look around them at their environment, identify problems, figure out ways to fix them, and then send that information down. But is that really the best way to conceptualize leadership? What we know is that in extremely complex and dynamic types of organizations, this type of leadership is actually really limiting in what it allows you to do, right? It takes longer to solve those problems if you have to do it by yourself, or if your followers are just sitting around expecting you to do it and then asking for you to give them direction, right? In highly complex and dynamic organizations, we need leadership from every level. We need followers involved with leaders making decisions. Now, can this always happen? No. Are you sometimes under time constraints? Are you sometimes under information or resource constraints? Sure. But are there those opportunities where you can better involve individuals in the follower role in order to help you make decisions? So is there a better way to conceptualize what leadership really is? That top-down leadership model is flawed for a variety of reasons. It assumes that leaders are responsible for leadership and takes followers completely out of the equation. It ignores relational dynamics. How many of you have ever been in a conversation with a subordinate? They're providing you with maybe some new information or a new perspective from which you hadn't thought about a problem before, and it changed your mind on something. Has that happened? Yeah, of course, right? So we know that leadership occurs in that relational dynamic. It ignores research on upward influence and upward communication, which has been around for actually quite some time. It ignores popular styles of leadership that are more collaborative or distributive in nature. And it pushes this traditional agentic top-down view of leadership that we can no longer hang on to. It just doesn't work anymore. Our organizations today are too dynamic and too complex. So is there a better way then? There are two different models that have been presented to think differently about how followers can be involved in leadership. The first one is what we call reversing the lens. So it simply looks at how followers influence upwards. At what point or in what way can individuals in a follower or subordinate role influence their leaders? By bringing new information, new ideas, suggestions, new solutions to problems, even challenging the thinking of the person that's leading, right? Maybe they have some erroneous assumptions about a problem or a situation. And so can those followers or subordinates influence up and provide timely information and insight that will help that leader make better decisions, right? So we've just changed the direction of the arrow. But leadership is still even more complex than that. What we find is that it's usually a complex relational dynamic or interchange, conversations that take place. When you sit down in meetings and you talk through problems or challenges that you face, opportunities that are ahead of you, how to plan for the future, there's usually lots of dialogue, right? People have ideas, they have perspectives. Your employees see a different part of your job than you do, right? And so they have different insights and different points of view to share that may be helpful. And this relational or interactional dynamic is where leadership happens. So leadership can't be just from the leader. It has to involve the collaboration of followers. So let's then redefine what leadership is. It's not about the leader. It's actually about the process of leaders and followers co-producing leadership. Say that word, co-producing. Co-producing. It's kind of a cool word, isn't it? And when you think about leadership as co-production, what that means is that it's a collaboration, and that every individual in that collaboration has something unique to offer, right? So if we then rethink the way we define leadership and think about it more as a process of co-production, the question then is, what role do followers play in that process? And unfortunately, we have very few answers to this question. So some of the work that we've been doing is looking at individuals in a follower role and asking them, kind of just from a baseline theory building perspective, to think about what followership means to them, right? So the first study that we did was a qualitative study that did interviews with individuals in a variety of positions that were also serving in a follower role, right? So people that are middle managers are still in a follower role, right? You're still reporting to some level of higher authority in the organization. And so for those middle managers, they might think about followership differently because they are also a leader, but they're having to engage in both roles simultaneously, right? So we conducted interviews with individuals to understand what beliefs they had about followership. And we simply asked them, what does followership mean to you? What do you think is important for someone serving in a follower role? And what kinds of actions or engagement or behavior makes some followers more successful than others? So we interviewed 31 people, and in the qualitative coding of our data, we got very nicely 3 kind of different groups of respondents. So as I talk about these 3 different groups of or sets of follower beliefs, what I would like you to do is to reflect both on your own style of working with your managers, as well as reflect upon the style of your subordinates or your followers that are working with you, and see if you can identify which of those individuals fall into these different categories. Because as we'll see at the end of the talk, there are a lot of implications for people that have different beliefs or different constructions of what the follower role is. Okay, so 10 of our respondents fell into this category of kind of a traditional definition of passive followership, right? So these are individuals who truly believe that leaders have better problem-solving ability. They have more power and authority for a legitimate reason. They are better at making the tough decisions. They are the ones that should be held accountable for outcomes. And these individuals are going to be highly deferent and passive in their engagement with leaders. They're largely going to remain silent and wait for leaders to tell them what to do. Not to say that they're not supportive. They will do it, and they will work hard, but they're not going to really engage in the leadership process because they truly believe that leaders have more knowledge, right? So one of the quotes from this group, when we asked them, what does followership mean to you? They said, mostly following orders, following through and carrying out orders, making sure that things get done, basically to support the leaders and their decisions and do things the leader's way, right? Now, are these followers important to have? Yes, they are, absolutely, right? There is no one group that's any better or worse than others, right? My question, I would say, is what happens if you are leading a department where all of the individuals fall into this passive role? Does it make your job as a leader harder? Right? Yes. Okay, so the second group that came out of our qualitative coding is a group that we called followers who have an active orientation. So these are individuals who are willing to bring forward new information, to share their ideas, their perspectives, their suggestions, and they want to be involved with the leadership process, but they're not going to do that unless they're asked to do it by the leader. So they're not going to be proactive about it. They're not going to go out of their way to bring leaders important information that they think the leader needs. They're only going to do that when asked, right? So one of the quotes from this group says, "It seems to me many times the knowledge that leaders have, working with different ideas, different concepts, different mandates, different financial knowledge that they have, a lot of decisions have to be made there. I would say that I'm oftentimes given the opportunity to voice ideas or concerns, but when the final decision has to be made, many times I feel like I'm more in a follower position," right? So this group, again, wants to be involved, but they're not going to go out of their way to do it, right? All right, the last group is what we called followers who have a co-production orientation. These are individuals who are extremely proactive, right? They are going to bring new ideas, new information, new insight to the table without being asked, right? They're going to sometimes even constructively challenge the assumptions or ideas of their leaders. They're going to push back a little bit, not in a negative or obstructive way, but they're going to be more forward in how they present their ideas and suggestions. One individual in this group says, "To me, to be an effective follower is all about being proactive, doing some of the detailed thinking that your leader may not, knowing when to bring other valid information to the table that says, you know what, let's talk about what you're trying to achieve rather than the solution you're asking me to implement. So challenging the thinking of the person you are following." Do you work with some of these people? Yes? Can you identify individuals that you work with that fall into each one of these categories to some extent? How about you in your own style of working with leaders that you engage with? What style do you adopt? Where do your beliefs fall on this spectrum? And how does that affect your own behavior? Now, I said at the beginning that there is no one right or wrong style. What I think is important to know from this is that you are going to work with followers who have a variety of different styles. And just because someone is not engaged and giving you ideas and suggestions and feedback and always speaking up does not necessarily mean that they don't have good, important ideas or that they don't want to do that. Sometimes they really want to, but there's this invisible power barrier that they feel like they can't get over, right? And that by speaking up or being too involved, that they're actually crossing a line, right? So when I do this presentation with managers and leaders, what I often ask them is, to what extent are you getting the contribution, the co-production that you're wanting from the people you're working with, from your own followers? And how can you bring that out, right? If you can identify which of these followers fall into different categories, are there certain things you can do to get them more engaged? Or, on the flip side, if you have a full department of individuals that fall into this co-production orientation, how do you manage to make decisions, get things done, keep things moving while you're being flooded with information, right? And what kind of follower are you, right? Which of these beliefs do you ascribe to, and how does that affect your behavior with managers in your organization? So these three categories then at least give us a starting point to understand different styles of followership and how those styles resonate from really deep-seated beliefs that we have about leadership, really, right? Our earliest, or some of the strong beliefs that you have internally about leadership come from growing up. They've been there forever, right? Who were the earliest leaders that you engaged with? Your parents, right? Sports coaches, teachers. All of those individuals had an influence on how you define leadership and therefore how you define followership, right? So knowing where those beliefs come from and then understanding what beliefs you have will then help you better understand why you tend to engage in a certain way, right, with authority figures. From this early data, we developed scales, measurement scales for these 3 different categories, and we've done a variety of other studies to garner further information about when and why followers engage with leaders the way that they do. So we collected data in 2 large hospital systems, one in the US and one in Denmark. And 2 of the important outcomes that we were looking at that we thought were important for the hospital context are 2 different types of voice, right? So one is called promotive voice. And this is a very, I don't want to call it a positive form of voice. It's a voice, it's a form of voice that tries to identify opportunities, right? What is out there that we can take advantage of? Is there an opportunity around the corner that we can capitalize on? Is there something around that we can use to implement or use as the impetus for change, for positive change, right? So promotive voice is all about identifying opportunities and trying to get better, right? The other form of voice is called prohibitive voice. Prohibitive voice only looks at challenges and tries to identify what is around the corner that can hurt us, right? If you exist as an organization in a state of chaos, where there's always lots going on and you're always putting out fires, prohibitive voice is typically the type of voice that you see more, because there are too many challenges for you to even begin understanding opportunities, right? But this is where I think followers can be very helpful, because as a leader, your responsibility is for accountability in terms of outcomes, right? You don't always have the opportunity to look for opportunities, because if you're constantly putting out fires and trying to prevent bad things from happening, you're never looking for how you can implement or push forward positive change, right? So we looked at these 2 forms of voice from followers. And what we found is that when followers have a very strong or high degree of what we call power distance, they believe in power differentials in the organization, and that they're more collectivistic in nature, they engage in more promotive voice. So among your employees, among the followers that you work with, even amongst individuals that you serve in the larger community, if they truly believe in power differentials and differences in authority and the legitimacy of authority, they're going to be more likely to identify opportunities when working with you as opposed to challenges, right? Because they don't want to be negative. High levels of uncertainty avoidance relate to more prohibitive voice. So what this means is that if I'm really nervous about what is going on around me, if I don't feel stability, and if I feel like everything is constantly shifting and changing and I can't get my feet underneath me, I'm only going to look at negative things and at challenges and at what we're not able to achieve, right? We also looked at identification with the leader, so followers who are really truly attached to and committed to their leader are more likely to engage in promotive voice, so identifying those opportunities. And then there are some followers that we're finding who are anti-authoritarian, who just truly don't trust authority at all. There are some individuals who see that authority, the whole job of authority is to manipulate and take advantage of the people below them. I see some of you smiling. So this is another kind of category of follower beliefs, right? Those individuals that fall into this anti-authoritarian category are not going to obstruct anything. They're not going to get in the way of outcomes being met, but they're also not going to help because they feel as though putting themselves out there makes them vulnerable for manipulation, right? And so by voicing ideas or suggestions, bringing forward new information, identifying opportunities, those types of things, opens them up to be manipulated by a leader. And so for those individuals, they typically have that belief because they've experienced this in the past, right? So they have their guard up, and they're not as likely to get involved and engaged in the leadership process, but they are going to engage in prohibitive voice, right? So the type of engagement that they're gonna put forward in terms of working with leaders is more about looking at all of the challenges and things around them that aren't working, and all of the things that are serving as roadblocks rather than opportunities to really advance and move forward. The study that we did in the hospitals in the US, we also looked at individual follower kind of outcomes in terms of commitment to the organization and intention to turn over, to leave their jobs. So the hospital that we were working with, particularly in the United States, has a 28% turnover rate. So 28% of their staff leave every year, which is a pretty high turnover rate. We have a different kind of healthcare system in the US, obviously. But those individuals, if you have to replace 28% of your workforce every year, you're not really able to take advantage of opportunities or get better at all, because you're constantly trying to play catch up, right, with what you're doing. What we found in terms of what predicts turnover is a real difference between followers that were highly skilled and followers who were more unskilled, right? Followers who are more highly skilled want to engage with leaders. They feel like that's a form of development. That if I can get involved in the leadership process, if I can work with and watch my manager make decisions, tackle obstacles, try to prevent challenging situations, that I am becoming a better employee, and I'm also increasing my own capabilities as a leader. That's what they want from their leaders. And those individuals or subordinates, followers that we studied that had that relationship with their managers were the ones that stayed, right? It was all of the individual employees who were not given those opportunities for one reason or another, likely because their manager simply didn't know how to do that or didn't have time, or that was not in their belief structure of how leadership operated to involve your followers. Those were the followers that turned over, right? Now the unskilled workers, the low-skilled workers, were very different. What they wanted from their leaders was not major opportunities for development, although they did say that was pretty important. What they more were interested in is that their leader was an advocate for them, that they supported them, that they stood up for them with higher levels of authority, and that they felt secure that their manager had their back, right? So when individuals, followers, subordinates were in that kind of a relationship with a manager they really trusted and felt like had their back and was supporting and advocating for them, they stayed in the organization. When they lacked that relationship, they left. So we were able to then look at what followers were receiving from the leadership process, what they wanted from the leadership process, and then that helped us to try to understand why certain people were turning over the way that they were. Okay, so implications. I think that one of the most important things, if you're going to take a tidbit from this as a leader, is that there are some followers that truly want to be engaged in your process, right? Can you utilize them? Are you utilizing them enough? Are you utilizing them too much? Right? Think about, as a leader, are you co-producing? And if not, why not? Is it that your followers aren't interested in doing that? Is it that you're constantly, you just don't have time to do it? There's too many other things to do. But are there opportunities for you to do that, right? What is the right way for leaders to incorporate followers into the leadership process? You obviously can't have them help you with every decision, right? You have to get stuff done. And there's often too much work on your plate to even do it all by yourself, right? So are there opportunities then that you could bring followers into the process more? Especially those followers that really want to be involved. What are the right decisions to bring them in on? What are the right processes to involve followers? And are you going to get a more positive outcome as a result. It brings up questions around fit, right? Fit is a really important topic that we talk about in leadership because managers and subordinates don't always get along, right? And perhaps one of the reasons why you might, or a manager might experience a lack of fit is because their view of followership is drastically different from their followers' view. So if I, as a leader, believe that followers should just be passive and do what they're told and that's it, but my followers really want to get involved in co-production, what kind of tension is that creating, right? Or vice versa. If I really want to bring people in and get them engaged, but my followers want to just be passive and follow orders, what kind of tension is that creating, right? So there are fit issues that we have not considered because up to this point, we haven't really thought about followers or their own unique styles. Can we develop followership the same way we develop leadership? So lots and lots of money goes into leadership development in organizations every year. However, most of those programs don't even mention followers, right? It's all about you as a leader. Self-awareness as a leader, learning about your own style, how you interact with others, but very rarely do we teach leaders about followers, and even more rarely do we teach followers how to be followers, right? Every one of those followership styles that I talked about has positives and negatives. Understanding your style, how you engage with leaders, what works about your style and perhaps what doesn't, is really important. But you have to take the initiative to figure that stuff out yourself, right? Self-awareness is super important to how we do our jobs because a lot of our jobs is just interacting with others. So if we can learn more about our style and the styles of those people around us, perhaps we can become better collaborators, right, at working with others. Okay, so I'll leave you with a quote, because I'm just about out of time. This came from our qualitative data, and it made us kind of think about followership from a different perspective, and it's what we call leading up, right? These are individuals who are leaders in a follower role, right? They're just not leaders yet. They will be one day. But these are individuals that have a very unique perspective on how they can engage with leadership and how they can promote leadership. And the quote says, "I think that people leading from the top down provide control and drive efficiency across an organization. I think people leading from the bottom up drive convergence and innovation and create new ideas and new possibilities. And I think the tension between the two is what drives growth in an organization. That tension is co-production." So the question we always ask is, how do we make that happen, right? I can't answer that. If you can write a book and you'll make millions. It'll be awesome, right? So that's all I have. Thank you so much for being so attentive and listening. Appreciate it. I would love to take questions if you have them. Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you for the talk. It was very, very good.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I was wondering, did you measure the same outcomes in the US and Denmark?
Some of them were different. Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought it were differences between cultural differences
Yes.
or difference between the countries.
So there are definitely cultural differences between Denmark. We measured the culture variables were all the same that we measured across those two different contexts. So the Americans tend to be a little bit higher in power distance than the Danish are. And we also tend to be a little bit stronger on uncertainty avoidance. So we don't like uncertainty at all. We like to have plans and backup plans for our backup plans, right? So the cultural differences were there. And those cultural differences very much predicted how people engaged with leaders in those different contexts. It's also interesting because they're two very different hospital systems, right? So the private sector dominates in the United States, whereas Denmark has a system that's more similar to yours, right? So what we did find in both systems was higher levels of kind of frustration and distrust amongst employees. employees saying that they wanted to get involved, but they didn't feel like they had the opportunity as much as maybe they would like. And we didn't measure turnover in Denmark, just in the US, so yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Thank you. My question is, did you observe that there was a growth model within the followership concept as well? Is it as dynamic and fluid as leadership is? Did it change according to the leaders that they were following?
That's a great question, right? So in our field, we talk about state or trait variables, right? So trait variables are those that are extremely stable, that don't change at all over time. And then state variables change with the context. This falls somewhere in the middle, right? So your beliefs about the follower role do change over time, right? Just as your beliefs about leadership change over time as you interact with different types of leaders, you engage in different contexts, and so on and so forth. But they don't change drastically. So I would not expect somebody who has a highly passive orientation to, after a year working in a new context, to all of a sudden be very strong in co-production. That drastic change probably wouldn't happen. You would see smaller shifts. The other thing that we did find, though, is that, for example, many of the individuals that had a very strong co-production orientation were working in a context that did not allow them to enact those behaviors, either because there were very strict lines of authority, a lot of bureaucracy, managers not willing to involve them in the process as much, and there's a lot of frustration when they have a belief that followership should be enacted in a certain way and they just can't do it, right, because of the context that they're in. But we also saw a lot of those people turning over in the hospital study too. So, does that answer your question? Good? Okay.
So I was just wondering, after you had a couple of months in Australia, without any journal research or anything behind it, what's your idea or feel about how we are different to either America or similar?
I don't know. You're very similar. Well, as a culture, I think you're fairly similar to America. As a healthcare system, you're very different, right, from America. So I don't really know. I've seen more similarities between the U.S. culture and the Australian culture than I've seen differences. And I haven't spent a lot of time in business contexts. I've been mostly at the university, so I think if I would have embedded myself more in an organization, I might see more of the differences. But I'm sure that they are there, right? It's not the same culture. And it's a very different type of organization and system that you're working in as opposed to that in the US. So that I know that there are drastic changes probably between the two, but I would love to learn more about what they are. So I didn't really get an opportunity to spend as much time in organizations here. That's one of the things I really want to do. So that's my next trip. Yes.
I'm very, very fascinated by that idea of followership development training.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, so in leadership we have situational leadership models.
Sure.
Thinking a followership model could be, a situational followership could be really quite interesting.
Yep.
They mentioned that really isn't anything in that space now. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts about, does the leadership culture need to change before you can further develop a followership culture?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I truly have retrained my mind to think about followership as a part of leadership, right? So you all are in health, right? You can't hurt one side of the body without hurting the other side, right? So it's a system, right? So you have to think about leadership in the same way, right? That if it really is a system and all parts have to work together in a uniform fashion, you can't just train leaders, you can't just train followers, right? You have to have some combination of both in order to achieve the results that you want, right? You have to treat the whole person, the whole system, right? And so since followership is part of leadership, you have to treat all of it, I would say, yeah. It was a really bad use of a health analogy, but.
Hi, my name's K Carsten. I'm from Children's Hospital Westmead Clinical School. I wonder what your thoughts are on individuals who shift between being leaders and followers.
So we're actually putting together a book right now on what's called the connecting leader. So individuals in middle management positions that have to shift between the leader and follower role. And it's really challenging. So there's very little research out there around this, but what we find is that those individuals that are in middle management positions, because they have to shift from being leader to follower constantly, and their role as a leader, your subordinates want something different from you than top management does, right? So top management wants you to be strategic, they want you to be thinking longer term, they want you to be planning for multiple potential outcomes of things. Your subordinates need more immediate, day-to-day type of feedback and attention and support. So you're being torn in these different directions, right? And so one of the things we find is that burnout amongst those positions is higher than any other position in an organization. Those people tend to really feel the emotional exhaustion from being torn in those two directions, and it's a very challenging role. And so we're starting to do a little bit of work in theory development and just a little bit of research on it. I would say that one of the things we know is very important is having good, solid relationships on both sides, right? So if you have good relationships with those individuals in higher levels of management and good relationships with subordinates, you are so much better able to cope with being torn in kind of two different directions, as opposed to not feeling like you have support on either side, right? And there's, and especially large organizations like yours, there tends to be subcultures that develop, right? And then subcultures, because they see themselves as the in-group, they start to see others as out-group members. And this can happen quite a bit with subordinates. And so the middle manager is then in an even more challenging spot because the subordinates see themselves as the in-group and they want the leader as part of their group. But the leader can't just be part of their group. They also have to report to higher levels of management that want different things. The more that leader works with upper management, the more that subordinate in-group tends to see the leader as an outsider, as one of them, right? That leader's not one of us, they're one of them. And that is really, really challenging to fix. And it is more of a systemic fix than it is fixing individual work groups or leaders or followers, right? It has to be a cultural shift. But we've seen it work. So does that kind of answer your question?
Yes.
Do you have one more question? Yeah? Sorry.
A slightly different perspective is where someone who is a leader and an expert becomes a novice and therefore a follower. That, I think that was perhaps more where I was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
So I just went on a whole tangent about something that wasn't even
but
interesting.
that, I think that's where I was coming
Okay.
from, perhaps more.
Yep. I mean, I think in that regard, we're all in those situations every day. I mean, think about yourself and how you interact with family members and friends, right? We're constantly shifting between leader and follower positions. So for some of us, that switching, that role switching is much easier than others. I think once you start to identify the fact that leaders often do need to have a higher level of knowledge or perspective than followers do, it's easier to switch back and forth. I don't want to be a leader in every situation, so for me it's really easy then to move into a position where I'm a novice about something and I can go along with others. Now, my own perspective about followership is that even if I'm a novice and I don't know as much as everyone else, I still need to have a good working knowledge of what we're doing, right? So I need to educate myself in order to be a good follower. Even if I'm just going to be more passive and follow directions, I still need to know what it is I'm doing, right? I'm not going to follow orders blindly and not understand what the consequences of those orders are. So as a follower, it kind of is my responsibility then, even in a position where I'm completely a novice, to educate myself and get up to speed so that I can follow appropriately, right? Just like you would as a leader, right? If you were put into a leadership role and you did not have the requisite level of knowledge, you would educate yourself. So, does that help? Okay. Hi.
We do a lot of work with adolescents, and I'm just
curious, with the background in education yourself, have you taken some of the studies you've done and looked at the younger generation and how they feel about followers and leadership?
Yes. Okay, so I get this question a lot, right? Because there are major generational differences. And when I do research with the students in my classes, my college students, they all are very proactive. They want to walk into an organization on the first day and make a difference. They want to go right into the chief executive's office and say, I have an idea, and we're going to do it, right? So they tend to be a little bit more aligned with that view of co-production to begin with, because they were raised differently. They had different types of parents and coaches and teachers and everything else, right? So they tend to be a little bit more aligned with co-production, I think. The data is not showing that as much because we have, because they're so new into organizations, they haven't had leadership positions yet very much, and so they don't often understand the other side, the leader side, right? So we're getting kind of this mix of data where we're not getting pure generational effects, but just qualitatively, anecdotally, I can see that there's a trend there for sure. Yeah. So it's just like you think. Yeah.
I'm mindful of time, Melissa. I was just going to ask, given that we've got leaders and we've got followers here present in the room, I guess for me, I just wanted if you could give your perspective and in view of your research, if you could give one action item that the group can take away for those leaders interested in learning about the styles of their followers, and for those followers perhaps interested in challenging their normal style they revert to and how they can be more collaborative and in a relational sense. What would one bit of advice you might give to take away today to do in the next week, say?
That's a great question. So I would ask you to start what I've already asked you to start doing, right? So tonight or the next time you have a free 5 minutes, think about these 3 categories: passive, active, and co-production. Which one do you yourself fall into and why, right? So be reflective about your own beliefs about leadership and about followership, and which category do you fall into? Now, within that category, what is very positive about having that set of beliefs? How has it helped you? And perhaps how has it hurt you or held you back or presented more challenges for you when you're engaging with either your own subordinates or with leaders above you? And then I would say for those of you that are managers, think about your subordinates and try to see if you can place them into a category. Now, it's not going to be a perfect placement because you're not them, but you can think about the way that you've seen them engage with you and different experiences that you've had with those subordinates and which ones fall into what group, right? If you do that exercise and you find that all of your subordinates fall into that passive orientation, that may be why you're experiencing some challenges. On the flip side, if you find that they all fall into that proactive or co-production orientation, what challenges or opportunities do you face from that, right? So if you just do some simple reflection exercises and kind of jot some of this down, it might at least make you more self-aware about why you're experiencing what you are when you're working both with the leaders above you as well as the followers beneath you.
Okay, on behalf of everyone here, just want to give Melissa Carsten a warm welcome and say thank you.